Imran Khan is facing altogether about 100 charges, but the one that's got him arrested and is that he's being held on is over. It's corruption. It's about a big block of land, about 60 acres, worth about $30 million, that was gifted to a trust that he and his wife were the head of, and by a Pakistani businessman who also repatriated about 190 million pounds back to Pakistan from the UK, and then Imran is alleged to have extended favours to him. Like I said, it's one of many that he's facing, but a court today has said that his arrest yesterday is legal and that he can be held for 8 days. He's 70, and remember, he was shot last year. He's still got a couple of bullets in his leg. He's limping. His health's not as good as it used to be.
Yeah, and you know, as you point out, he faces several other charges. There's been a lot of pressure to get him under arrest, facing court. He calls it a political witch hunt. What is your assessment of why the government is going after him so fervently?
He's the most popular politician in Pakistan. There's supposed to be a general election this year by September or October. And if it was held today, in September, Imran would win and he would be Prime Minister once more. So the current Prime Minister, Sharif, and his party would very much like at least one of these many charges to stick, because if Imran becomes a convicted felon, he won't be allowed, according to the Constitution, to run for Prime Minister. This is the way the current Prime Minister, hopes to keep Imran out of the race.
Yeah, and as you point out, he's highly popular. There have been protests that have become quite violent right across the country. And there have also been hundreds of other arrests as a result of those protests, including some of his own political party.
Well, yes, I'm getting WhatsApp messages from people who are close to him who are saying that there have been thousands of arrests across the country. The army has been called out in a couple of the big states where about 75% of the Pakistani population live. And now, yes, apparently, reportedly, there are people who are close to him, office holders in his PTI party, who are also facing arrest.
Yeah. Well, we'll watch as that unfolds. As you say, he's been remanded for 8 days. But let's move to Afghanistan, where you have, of course, closely reported on for many years, and recently again written about the dilemma the international community is facing in recognising Afghanistan. Now, this is in the face of a dire economic situation, babies dying, just no aid getting through to the people who need it most.
It is pretty bad, Bev. The Taliban retook control in August 2021, as you know. And since then, a bad situation, because it was certainly no bed of roses for ordinary Afghan people before the Taliban came back, but a bad situation has become worse. The economy is imploding. And, I mean, America has put $8 billion of aid into Afghanistan in that time, just since August 2021. But there are very credible reports, and I have UN documentation backing this up, that a good proportion of it is diverted by the Taliban to their own supporters, and not a lot of it. People have said to me it'd be a miracle if 50% of it got through to the people who really need it. But in the midst of this, the Taliban has been tightening its controls on the population, but most effectively and brutally on women. Women are no longer allowed to work. They're not allowed to leave their homes unless they're completely covered up and they are accompanied by a male relative as a chaperone, and they're not allowed to go to school beyond primary school. So after grade 6, that's it for girls. No high school, no university. Even those who are already at university haven't been able to finish their courses. But all of this was compounded on Christmas Eve last year, on December the 24th, when the Taliban announced that women couldn't work for charities either, and that includes the UN agencies that are present in Afghanistan. So this has created a real dilemma. Does the UN go along with that and do what it did in the 1990s and basically obey the Taliban's restrictions, and that means that it would be going against the charter that you and I support as taxpayers and as Australians who are, and Australia is a member of the United Nations. Or does it go along with what the Taliban say and basically entrench the abuses that the Taliban are basically perpetrating against Afghan people. It's a bit of a dilemma, and I think, I've described it as an existential moment for the UN. Do they undermine their charter and go along with the Taliban, or do they pull out and leave Afghan people basically to starve?
Yeah. It's interesting, the game, though, that China is playing, because they are looking at integrating Afghanistan into the Belt and Road Initiative, which presumably would see funds flowing into Afghanistan, but not necessarily, again, to the people who need it the most.
Well, not to the people who need it the most, because the Chinese Communist Party has had a very close relationship with senior Taliban leaders for decades. And there's a couple of reasons that they've done that. One is that, it's an anti-US, anti-UN move, but also because they wanted to be able to make sure that the Taliban weren't supporting Uyghur guerrillas who are anti-state and do threaten the Chinese Communist Party, and who are locked up in enormous numbers. The Americans say 1 million people locked up in a genocide by the Chinese state against Uyghur Muslims. But also they want, the Chinese would like to get a hold of the mineral assets. There's a lot of undeveloped mineral assets that could be very useful to China, especially lithium for energy storing batteries, coal, uranium, gold, you name it, Afghanistan's got it. So China has an agenda that doesn't include human rights or feeding hungry people.
Yeah. Good as always to talk to you, Lynne. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Bev.